All right. So for tonight's sneak preview screening of Corsage, we are very fortunate to have the filmmaker and writer Marie Kreutzer here with us tonight. She's actually here in New York City this week supporting the film, but talking to us via Zoom. Either way, very happy to have you here to talk with us about the film, Marie. I was reading in the press notes and very interested to see that your lead actress, award winner from Cannes, very, very deservedly so, she was the one who initially conceived of the idea of you two collaborating together on this biopic. So I'm curious how that, if you had worked with her before, your knowledge of each other, your plans to collaborate in other contexts.
Vicky Krebs and I, we did a film together in 2015. It was called We Used to Be Cool. It's also very good. You could see. It's a tragic comedy about a group of friends who have babies and how all of that changes their lives. But shortly after that, Vicky was doing Phantom Thread, and her life changed, of course. But during all of that, and when we were traveling with that film, we were talking about working together again at some point, and she said to me, "Why don't we make a film about Empress Elisabeth?" And I just laughed. I didn't take it seriously. I live in Austria. I grew up there, and Sissy is mainly to us. She's mainly the woman who's printed on all the souvenirs. Yeah. So she's not. It's just not a very interesting figure. It was not an interesting figure to me at that point. But then sometime later, the idea just kind of stayed with me. And sometime later, I started reading and going to the museums and finding out more about her, and was just curious if there was something in the material that would resonate with me enough to want to tell a story about her.
Right. And so how did you get to that point where you said, hey, this is actually inspiring to me? Because it sounds like you were quite skeptical at the beginning. Mm-hmm. What was the threshold that you crossed?
I mean, in Austria and also in Germany, we are all familiar with her story of how she became an empress. And there are these very famous films from the 1950s with Romy Schneider as Elisabeth, who show her as a young, energetic princess who comes, who suddenly becomes the Empress of Austria by the age of 16 and is really overwhelmed by all of this. And it's a very popular series of films. And so we all know how she became an empress, and we all know how she died because she was dramatically murdered. But then I didn't know so much about the time in between. And when I started reading about her, I focused on her in her 30s and 40s, because I knew if I would do the film, I would do it with Vicky, and it should be a part that she was good for. And so I focused on that time in her life, and I found a few very many interesting things actually that I hadn't known before. And what I found most interesting for me is that I think she never really liked being an empress, and at that time she started showing it, and she started what I would call small acts of rebellion. Like, for example, smoking, which she was not supposed to do as a lady. Then at one point she smoked in public. She was seen smoking in public, which was a scandal at that time. She refused to eat. She traveled a lot and did a lot of working out with riding the horses and walking and hiking and all of that, which was also not typical for a woman of that time, or they were not working out at that time. So it was really, she did a lot of things that she was not really supposed to do, and kind of enjoyed that, I think. And that's where I sensed a rebellious side to her. And I thought a story about a woman deciding not to meet all the expectations anymore is exactly what I can relate to and what I want to make a film about. So that was really the point.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting when you think about how theoretically someone is very powerful, but with that position of so-called power comes this whole web of expectations and rules and regulations to live very, very narrow lifestyle, actually. So, and you see that in the film. So I'm curious about your research process. You know, a lot of history is being revisited these days, and you know, because there's this notion of, you know, history was originally written by white men, and you know, from a very biased perspective. Did you find that you had to do a lot of work to get to the more colorful or authentic feeling aspects of her lifestyle and history, or do you feel like it was that there has been enough historical research on her as a historical figure that you trusted most of the sources you found?
I mean, the good thing is that she's so extremely known and popular that there are really many biographies on her, and also written by women. And there's a very, very famous one. The one biography everyone refers to in Austria is by Elfriede Hamann. It was a very, she doesn't live anymore, but she was a very respected historical writer. And this is really the biography on Sissi, which was, of course, the first I read. But what I found very interesting is that reading different biographies from different people in different times, I realized that that history is always a matter of interpretation, you know.
Sure.
Every biography was very different. So it was like you were, they very often had more to do with the person who wrote it, or
Right.
the time it was written in, than with the actual figure of her. So what I maybe relied on most, or what I think were the most important books for me, were the diaries of her daughter, the youngest daughter, who's also in the film, and her lady-in-waiting Marie, who's also an important character in the film. Because, and especially Marie's diaries, because she was a very, very smart woman who would observe the Empress in a very critical, but also very, very loving way. And this was really like reading from someone who actually lived with her.
Right.
But then, of course, I never intended to make this, you know, as you know now that you've seen the film, a correct, you know, it's not trying to do everything right. So anyway, I felt quite free to just use biographical detail and play with it.
So maybe you're a little bit like the other biographers who came before you. You know, it says more about you and the story that you wanted to tell.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah. So, so in terms of working with a period film, which, you know, I think period films used to have this conception of being very traditional and also conservative and formulaic, and you've done something actually, I think, quite refreshing within the realm of a period film. What were you, you know, what rules were you kind of excited to break or intending to break working within this specific genre?
Well, I think that most of the period films we refer to when we think of great period dramas are Hollywood films. So they all had a budget that we would never have for a European co-production. So it was clear for me from the beginning that we would not be able to do it in a perfect way, you know, the way that the audience would expect from something like that. So we had to find our own way, our own style anyway. And I always think that making compromises is always part of my job, but it's always something that it also inspires me. So I'm not saying that this is, in the end, it was not making compromises, it was making our film, but it came from the very first thought of, we can't do it like Hollywood would do it, you know, we have to find something else.
Right.
And then also I'm sometimes quite bored with the perfect period films, because sometimes they feel like filmmakers showing off their exquisite costumes and beautiful locations. And I was really more focused on the characters and didn't, I wanted to look everything lived as if it really was lived in.
More authentic.
Yes, more authentic and as natural as we would show, in the same way we would show a contemporary apartment, for example. We wouldn't think about showing off the details. And so that's how also we were trying to shoot it.
So, just in parting, I'd love to hear more about your dynamic with your lead actress. I mean, her performance is so compelling, and obviously your work and writing are such a big part of the film, but her performance is so magnetic and also just very powerful. She's very you get the feeling of a very strong personality. So I'm imagining that perhaps your actress has a strong persona as well. So what was it like to collaborate with her on this film? She's in virtually every scene, and that collaboration must have had some unique aspects about it.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we knew each other before, but we had to reconnect, of course. It had been years, and she was like the big star, had become the big star in the meantime. She came to Vienna 2 months before we started shooting and was preparing by, she had to learn to fence. She was already able to ride horses, but she had to learn it in the ladies' seat and with the corset. She had a lot of costume fittings. She had to learn Hungarian, so she really had a schedule like for school or something. And while she was doing that, I was doing my preparation with all the other departments as well. And then almost every evening we would spend together, well, very often with our kids who are the same age, and sometimes even with our mothers. And sometimes we cooked together, and it was just we really got close again, but we did not talk so much about the film. Actually, it was just like sometimes she would say, can I have this or that as a prop, and then sometimes I would say, what do you think about this or that? But it was just occasionally. Normally we would just spend time together, and I really think that was important for us to really have that feeling of being close and trusting each other without many words then when we were finally on set. Also because I tried to distance her a little from the crew, because I sensed that would help to, when we were always starting to shoot immediately when she would enter the room. No rehearsals, no nothing. She would enter and we would shoot. And what that meant was
that's interesting. Why did you decide to do that?
Because I could feel when we did some rehearsals, and I sensed that was not really good for this film, because normally I would do rehearsals so that the actors would really feel comfortable with each other and just feel close. But for this film, this felt actually wrong, to have them, sitting around in sweatpants and chatting. That just felt wrong. Right. So I tried to keep them apart, and that there was that certain distance, even especially when she entered the room in the entire costume and with the wig and all of that. She felt like another person, and she really looked like the Empress suddenly. So everyone was like, and I always think the audience can feel the actual atmosphere that was in the room. And there was really, like, when she was coming from her makeup room or costume room to the set, someone would tell us she's coming, and then everyone was like, she's coming, and it already felt like someone really important was coming, and we had to be prepared. And for her, sometimes it was hard to not be friendly with everyone all the time, because it's how she usually is.
That sounds like, now hearing you contextualize it, that sounds like it was a very smart call to really, so that distance between her and her fellow actors and crew, that was organic. It wasn't, performance. It's so interesting. Any other things that you would like to share about your collaboration with her, and in terms of such
I mean, it's just wonderful to work with her, because she is so in the moment, and this is not this is like the ideal for actors. I think she's really there, and she's not observing herself. She gives herself to the moment, and whatever she has prepared, she's never trying to fulfill a plan that she has made for the scene or something. She's really there to let things happen in the moment, and that's what I appreciate most. And she's also really fun to work with, and because I sometimes do improvisations, or I let the camera roll longer than the scene actually takes, so that the actors who would never say cut, obviously, just have
Right.
to keep on going. And then sometimes great things happen.
Right.
And that's something that she enjoys. And that, so she's really, and she's unpredictable for me too. So I never try to just repeat takes and make them better and better, but we try something else for every take. And so it stays really fresh for all of us. And that's something that's great fun with her, because she doesn't have like, I have to do it this way to be the perfect whatever.
Right. And so you did do some improvisation with this film?
Yes. Yes.
That's cool. Are there any interesting moments that that were successful and made it into the film that were improvised?
I mean, the improvisation doesn't, very often that doesn't mean they are speaking anything which is not written, but it means that I give them a very different subtext for the scene, for example, where sometimes they would say, with this text, I should play it like this. How do you think that will work?
Right.
But that sometimes brings a lot of tension and fun to a scene, because I usually don't talk to the actors together. I talk to them separately, so they never know what to expect from the other one.
Right.
And that's sometimes how situations happen, which you couldn't make up. And so there's not really so many good examples, because the actual lines are mostly the lines that I wrote, but sometimes things happen between the people. And for example, the scene where Elisabeth jumps out of the window after the fencing happens spontaneously.
Really?
There was another scene in the film where Elisabeth jumps out of the window, which was shot with a lot of stunt coordination and everything, which is not in the film. But at this point at the shooting, there was such a tension in the room, the two of them fencing and fighting, that when he left the room, the emperor, Florian, who plays the emperor, I just let Vicky standing there, and I said to my DOP, let the camera roll, let's see what happens. And then she cried, and then at some point she went to the window, and everyone was like, what is she doing? And I mean, we were on the ground floor, but still it was not planned. And my DOP was like, oh my God, there's no light out there.
Right.
So it was not planned at all, but I think, of
That's
course,
a
we
cool
knew that we would shoot
improvisation.
another scene with her jumping out of the window, but in that moment, she felt like just doing it. And that's something that I like so much about her, because she just comes up with things like that. And it's perfect now in the film, I think.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool that was her notion. So anyway, that's a interesting note to part on. Well, really appreciate your time today, and love hearing some of the background on the film, some of the creative choices that helped bring this really beautiful and inspiring film to light. I think it's going to be this is going to be our last film club for the year, and I think it's a really great note to end on, something sort of grand, intense, and spectacular as Corsage. And I wish you the best with the opening of the film, which I know is later in December. I think it's going to be a great holiday film. So thank you again for your time, and I wish you the best with the release here in the States.
Thank you very much, and have a great evening there.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.